Hi, I'm Kevin Glen-Drake. I'm here at my bench at the Glen-Drake Toolworks to talk to you about joinery saws. Saws that typically have a back on them to tension the blade, like this Western back saw, this Japanese back saw, and the saw that we make here at the Glen-Drake Toolworks. I'll be telling you more about this saw a little bit later, but right now let's take a look at the difference between Japanese and Western saws. One works on the push and one works on the pull, but that's the way we use them. The real difference lies in the geometry of the blades. Here's a model that will help us visualize the geometry of the Japanese saw versus the geometry of the Western saw. The teeth on a Japanese saw lean in the direction of the cut. The teeth on a Western saw lean away from the direction of the cut. So the Japanese teeth are working like little chisels, whereas the Western teeth are working like little scrapers. What kind of wood cuts the best? Softwoods, the softer the better. What kind of wood scrape the best? Hardwoods, the harder the better. What kind of woods do the Japanese cut? The Japanese cut primarily softer woods, woods like cedar and pine and paulownia. We cut Western woods, hardwoods, oaks, maples, and cherries. And a scraper works best on the push, not the pull. That's why I prefer a Western push saw for working Western hardwoods, especially for ripping. When you're cross-cutting, you are severing fibers no matter what. But when you're ripping, you are not severing fibers, you are scraping them down. And those thin Japanese blades with teeth pointing in the direction of the cut do not make very good scrapers. Do I have Japanese saws? You bet I do. Most of them have teeth missing, because when I first acquired them I did not understand saw geometry, and the sound I heard most often was ping, ping. Those were the teeth coming off, because I was asking the saw to do something that it was never designed to do. Now let's examine Western saws. Western saws typically have a fixed pitch. That means that the number of teeth per inch is the same throughout any given saw. Is that because fixed pitch is optimal? I don't think so. I think we have fixed pitch saws because someone made a mechanical device that cut teeth on a saw and it wasn't very smart, so it cut them all the same. All of this happened long before we came along, so now we call it tradition, and it may very well be. But now we have more sophisticated machines that are computer controlled, so we can have any pitch pattern that we like. The real question is, what pattern works the best? That depends on the species and the dimensions of the wood you're working. More teeth does not necessarily mean better results. A little tooth and a big tooth both cut exactly the same. So the real difference in pitch is in the size of the gullets. The gullets have to be deep enough to carry the waste from one side of the piece to the other so that gravity can dump it out. If they're not, then they fill up with debris and the saw feels mushy. Then we add more pressure because we think the saw is not cutting. The blade bends from the pressure inside the kerf and the saw cuts in the direction that it's bending. The biggest single factor for saw drift is too much pressure. At the same time, you have to have enough teeth in the kerf to support the saw. Too many teeth and the saw feels mushy. Too few teeth and the saw tends to grab. The saw handle can also make a difference in the way we work. I'm a big fan of working as relaxed as possible. We simply cannot move fluidly if we are rigid and tense. Most Japanese saws and some Western saws have a straight handle, but most Western saws have a pistol grip handle. Unfortunately, a pistol grip locks your wrist into one position, forcing you to tension your body as you work, whereas a straight-handled saw allows you to change that angle so that you can relax as much as possible. I therefore prefer a saw with a straight handle. Now let's take a look at the saw that we make here at the Glen-Drake Toolworks. We call it a joinery saw instead of a dovetail, carcass, or tenon saw because it can be any of those things. Here's a model that will help us visualize its unique geometry. First of all, there are no teeth on the front or the rear of the blade. That's because when I decided to make a saw, I asked myself why so many people struggle with a handsaw. The answer came to me from looking at how some other tools work. A hand plane, for example, moves before and after it cuts. We move, we engage the blade, we maintain cutting velocity, and the plane moves off the other end. A power saw moves before and after it cuts. You would never put a piece of wood into a table saw blade and then turn the saw on, and you would never turn it off and keep feeding the wood. But that's what we do with a handsaw all the time. We grind to a start and grind to a stop on the teeth. Our tooth-free zones at the front and rear of the blade mean that we can maintain cutting velocity while the teeth are engaged, the same way a power saw maintains cutting velocity while the teeth are engaged. In other words, the teeth are never touching the wood unless they're moving. Our saws are also coarser in the middle than they are on either end. This allows us to ramp into and out of the coarsest part of the cut. Those two things combined, being able to maintain cutting velocity while the teeth are engaged, plus ramping into and out of the coarsest part of the cut, virtually eliminates all of the binding that goes on in a handsaw. Besides having a fixed pitch, most Western saws have a fixed blade. Some Japanese saws have replaceable blades, and every power saw I can think of not only allows you to replace the blade, but it allows you to install a blade that is appropriate for the task at hand. So using the power saw as a model once again, we made a saw that not only allows you to change the blade, but it allows you to choose and insert a blade that is appropriate for the material that you are working. There are 6 screws on the back of the saw that secure the blade. Loosen those screws and the blade slides out. Slide in another blade, secure the screws, and you're off and running. There are 3 blades available for our saw. Our fine blade starts at 18 teeth per inch, goes down to 14 for 2 inches, and back up to 18. You would use this blade for cutting 1/2-inch hardwood. Our medium blade starts at 16, goes down to 12 for 2 inches, and back up to 16. You would use this blade for cutting 3/4 hardwood. And our coarsest blade, which starts at 14, goes down to 10 and back to 14, is just right for cutting the cheeks of a tenon on a table stretcher, for example. Well, that's it for this segment. Now that you know something about our saw, take a look at our next segment to see how it works and to get some pointers on how to practice. Thank you for joining us.